So, threepenny bitting, where does the term come from? For anyone who hasn't seen one before, and there'll be a few people out there, this is a threepenny pence piece. It's a dodecahedron, which is a 12-sided object. And the term threepenny bitting is basically when you're riding a bike and the bike is being leant into a corner and you're sitting up and sitting down, sitting up, sitting down. So you're creating a shape which is a bit like a multi-sided object instead of a nice smooth curve. But anyone who was born after 1970 won't remember them. To my embarrassment, I can remember as a young lad going to the corner shop and getting threepence worth of sweets in a bag, in a mixed bag.
With a threepenny bit?
With a threepenny bit. So I can actually remember using them. But what's strange is the term has hung around and hung around and hung around. I mean, the reality is we would probably use a 50 pence piece as a better example, because it's more obvious that the shape only being 7 sides. But nobody actually uses going round 50 pence piece in a corner. I've never heard that term, even though the reality is a similar thing. Yeah, well, it's a bit like, if you think of it like a dot-to-dot drawing, using the dots as reference points. The idea behind them is to get people to visualise a shape and to ultimately to draw a shape. But when you were a child or not experienced at these sort of things, what you tend to do is look at one, you'd look at your next reference point and draw a line straight to it. You'd look for 3, you'd draw a line straight to that. You'd then see 4, and then you'd continue to go directly to each individual point. As you become more fluent at doing the dot-to-dot drawings and you get more experienced at it, full stop, what you tend to do then is you realise that this is supposed to be a curl or a curve as such. So you realise instead of looking directly at that, you look past that for 3. So you see 1, 2, 3. So you start to create more of a curve. And then you see down to 4 and you create a curve to 4, curve to 5, curve to 6, and so on. So instead of it being very point to point to point, reference point to reference point, you're creating what you should be creating, which is a more natural curve. And that's where threepenny bitting comes in.
And can you just finish Brian off, please, with a curve? Because you're an adult and you know what the shape should be, so you don't have to threepenny bit, do you?
So exactly, I'm looking at 13. I'm trying to create a natural kind of arc. So that's kind of life of Brian as he should be. Well, the principle of dot-to-dot drawing, that's something I use when I'm coaching somebody, because when you're creating a line round a circuit or into a corner, you generate reference points. You know, you're approaching a corner, your first reference point is going to be where you brake. You then look at the tipping reference, you then look at the, ultimately you're looking into the apex, which is a reference, and then on the run to the apex, so you've got your brake release reference point. And once you've made the apex, you look at your pickup point where you pick the throttle up, you then look at your drift out reference. So you're creating a line round the corner in your mind of, at the moment, it's just reference points. A bit like a dot-to-dot drawing, you're kind of creating a shape, but when you just see the reference points, you tend to drive straight to them. It's all too easy to sort of just stare at one reference point, arrive at it, and then look for the next one, and then kind of point the bike towards that. And that's where you create the bike or the line round the corner, and we've all kind of done it to a point where the bike's kind of sitting up, sitting down, sitting up, sitting down, and that kind of indecision going round the corner generally isn't good news. All I'm trying to do here is give you a visual representation, give you something else to think about, instead of doing Life of Brian the Snail, dot to dot. This is another way of thinking about it. The red line here, or the red dots for argument's sake, are your tip-in, apex and drift out point. And if you take it very literally and arrive in a straight line at your tip-in reference, you then quickly change direction and aim for your apex. Depending on the radius of the corner, you can end up obviously apexing effectively too early into the corner. You then have to do a rapid change of direction again, which takes you out to your drift out point, another change of direction to get you down onto the straight. Where the green line represents much more of a consistent radius. So if you can imagine now using the green line as the constant radius, is arriving as you're coming down here, we're now looking at the reference point, but before we get there, even at this point, we're starting to look down for the your apex. So as you start to tip in here, we're already looking for that point. And then as we're radiusing our way in towards the corner, well before we get to your apex, we're already looking through the corner for the drift out point. So we're not looking where we're going, we're looking into the distance of where we want to go, which is actually not where the bike's pointing. So by the time you get to your apex, you've already seen where the bike's going now, which is your drift out point. So from here, we're looking not at that point now, we're looking away down the distance, or almost down to the straight, or down to the next reference point that you're actually utilising. So when you get further around the corner, we're certainly not looking at that, we're now looking down the straight, and then away we go onto the straight itself. What we're going to look at here is a chap riding 1100 Aprilia at Almere, for anyone who can spot where we are, and there's a series of corners round, I think it's turn 4, 5 and 6, I think it is, where the 3 corners you really need to kind of string together. Even though they're fractionally different radiuses, what you can try and do is create, using speed and reference points, and try and create one relatively smooth curve right the way around the corner. So leaving turn 3, goes into turn 4, makes the apex of 4, drifts out, but you can see the small movements of the bikes up, down, up, down, up, down. All these deviations in line are all ultimately starting to sort of put a bit more stress on the bike. You're testing the amount of grip you've got, where if you can create much more of a smooth line, you've got more consistency in what you're doing. And the faster you go to a point, that line automatically starts to smooth out anyway. So kind of one invariably helps the other. You obviously need to build to this. You don't just go around the corner really fast and then try and figure out where you're going. To try and get rid of the threepenny bit, there's 3 key things I think you need to remember. Firstly is reference points, vision and speed. And they all need to kind of pull them together. Key thing about reference points really to me is identify them, use them, and if you need to, as your speed or as your experience starts to develop, is potentially change them. They're not set in stone, these things. You can change things, and you may well need to change them as your pace develops. Second thing, vision, is basically lift your vision up. A lot of people look too close to them, essentially, and not far enough away, i.e. as they're approaching a particular reference point, they kind of stare at it until they're right on it, and then they look up for the next reference point. They realise it's over there, they then stare at it and aim towards it, arrive at the next one staring at it, look for the next one, and then drive to that. So you end up with this in, out, up, down kind of action round the corner. So as you're approaching, for argument's sake, your tipping reference, don't wait till you're right upon it before you start looking into the corner. As you're approaching it, start to look away from it, lifting your vision up, and start to look into the corner. And as you're approaching the apex, look away from the apex, because you know you're going to make it at that point. Start to look out for things like your drift out point, or the point that you're going to pick the throttle up, etc. And the next one is speed. There's a term I tend to like to use, is speed can actually in this situation be your friend. If you're going slowly trying to generate a racing line round a corner, it's quite difficult sometimes, because you end up threepenny bitting because you don't know how hard or how quickly to turn into a corner, and then you've turned in a bit too early, so you have to sit it up and then go back down again because you're looking up for your next reference point. Where the faster you go to a point, the more natural these curves, these radiuses become. It's because A, it's harder to turn in the faster you're going, and it's harder to change direction the faster you're going. So speed to a point can become your friend.
Is that because it sends you out to the part of the track that you would be if you wouldn't get there if you were going slower?
It's sometimes more natural. If you go into a corner with a bit of pace, you tend to get naturally sort of pushed out wide. Now that is often where you may need to go. Where if you're driving slowly and you arrive at, say, the apex of a corner and you need to drift out, you have to almost sit the bike up and drive out there. Where if you're carrying more pace around the corner, the radius starts to become a much more natural kind of shape. So if you think of it along the lines of speed can sometimes be your friend and not over panic and overreact. So if you think about reference points, vision, speed as the three primary things, and then the caveat to that, speed can help. And another great term which is commonly used, and it's a great one, is look where you want to go, not where you're actually going. Because if you look where you're going, you're driving straight to that reference point. That's where you kind of steer, and you'll definitely go there. But the problem is then, when you look up, you then need to sort of get this rapid change of direction. So if you, as you're approaching that point, look away, lift your vision up, and look where you want to go, not where the bike's actually going, it will genuinely help you around the corner. A great example of that, if you've bailed into a corner way too fast and you're feeling very much out of shape, the automatic reaction from as a human, I guess, is to look where you're actually going. You're kind of looking what you're going to hit, sort of thing. And invariably then, that's where you'll end up going. The best solution in many ways, but it takes a little mind over matter, is to stop looking at that and is to look where you want to go. The chances are you haven't gone into the corner that much faster than you have done previous laps. You've just slightly outside your comfort zone. So if you've got the presence of mind to look away from where the bike's going, look where you actually want to go to get to, let's say the drift out point, and give the corner a go. Keep off the throttle at that point if you've gone in a bit hot, and try to get to that point. You'll be scrubbing speed off the whole time. Because often people, for instance, a great example is, say, going into Donington Park into Redgate, and you've gone in really hot, and they think, oh, I'll sit up and stop before you get to the edge of the track. And you don't realise quite how fast you're going, and there's very little chance of you actually stopping before you get to the edge of the track. Where if you're not going into the corner that much faster than you have before, but you're uncomfortable, if you look where you want the bike to go and give the bike a chance. And you'll surprise yourself often. You may run quite wide and you may run even offline, but if you carry on turning, carry on reducing speed, you stand a great chance of actually making the corner. Not perfect, but at least you're still on track. Riding smoothly, i.e. creating a nice arc into a corner and changing direction nicely, being smooth in what you're doing, is a general better way, because if you think about this Thripney bitting, sitting the bike up, down, up, down, up, down when you're going around the corner, if you're consistent with your line and it's nice and smooth, the geometry, what's actually happening to the bike, the input that you're putting into the bike is consistent, which gives consistent grip. It gives a better feel, a more consistent feel, gives you more consistent control, and ultimately will give you confidence in what you're doing, and what the feedback you're getting back from the bike is more constant. If you're constantly sitting the bike up, down, up, down, up, down when you're going around the corner, you're changing how the bike's going to feel, you're changing the grip level, you're changing the amount of effort that you're putting into the bike. All this kind of inconsistency that you're putting into the bike generally isn't good, because if you're kind of getting towards the edge of grip anyway, you're really pushing on, and then you think, oh, I've got to go in a bit more, or oh, I've got to sit it up. You're asking a lot of the tyres. And because of that change of feel, you might actually then start to kind of lose a bit of control, and then you lose a bit of confidence, and it all kind of spirals away from you. So being smooth, consistent, doesn't stop you being fast either. But if you use speed as your friend, sort of carrying plenty of speed while that's happening, it tends to give that more natural radius, as long as you've identified your reference points, and you can ultimately make them when you get to them. So utilising your vision to see the reference points, keeping your pace up, which is your speed, and being smooth, should give you more consistent control of the bike. If you're dealing with something which is constantly changing, it's difficult to then be consistent, because you've got to sort of, when you've lent the bike in, you've got to then feel what the grip's like and feel what you've got left to play with, and then you have to sit the bike up again because you realise you've gone in a bit early, and it's all kind of fingers and thumbs. Where once you've developed the reference points, and you've put some more speed into it, and you've developed this smooth lines into corners instead of your Thripney bit, ultimately the whole thing becomes much more smoother and more consistent, and it should inspire confidence in you. You identify your reference points, you use your vision to look past the reference point that you're approaching, look for your next one, and you carry speed around the corner to give you that more natural corner. Remember, look where you want to go, not where you're going.